Okay.
So welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. I'm Ann Heppenstall. I'm the Community Emergency Preparedness Coordinator for City of Los Altos. And we've been doing a series of these emergency preparedness related webinars. You can check it out at www.losaltosca.gov/prepares. And tonight is one of the series. So I've been working with Lavinia for a while and she's been giving some talks and I invited her and she kindly accepted. So I'd like to introduce Lavinia Pearson, who's Associate of Pastoral Care and Outreach at Los Altos Lutheran Church. And go ahead and tell us about yourself and take it away, please, Lavinia.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ann. I just want to thank Ann for this invitation to participate and to share a little bit about what I've been doing at home and how it has affected our role and work at the church. So before I move on from this slide, I just want to point out that my primary focus for this evening will be on home supplies for to-go kits and the stay-at-home kits. And this particular grid that is up on my page is from the Earthquake Country Alliance, just in case you were interested in that. I forgot to put the email on there. But again, it is Earthquake Country Alliance, and you'd be able to go to their website and to find this little check sheet for some suggestions for things that you might like to include in your kits. So Ann and I actually have an interesting relationship. We met in yoga class, and then about a year and a half ago, Ann called me up and said that she was the Emergency and Disaster Preparedness Coordinator for the City of Los Altos. And so Ann and I have enjoyed conversation between yoga and also our care for helping the community in this way. So I just want to thank you again, Ann, for this invitation. So when we started this conversation with Ann on how faith-based communities could connect and participate to be partners within the community, we kind of weren't sure what to do. And so we decided that we just needed to start. And so you'll see the title of my talk tonight is Just Start, because sometimes it's hard to know where to start or what to do. And so just getting started is a good place to start. So a little bit about myself. I have lived in the Bay Area for almost 40 years. I grew up in South Dakota where we did not have earthquakes and we didn't have fire seasons like we do here in California. And so my experiences were a lot different, but I've lived in the Bay Area a long time. My husband and I have lived in this house for about 35 years, and we did experience the Loma Prieta earthquake of 1989. I had two very small children at the time, and we currently lived about 13 miles from the epicenter. So in conversation with a friend, she said, you need an emergency kit. It's like, well, what would I put in it? So that was kind of the beginning. And at that point, I put some stuff together and it got old and the food got expired, and then I stopped doing it and said, well, I guess we'll just deal with it. Well, fast forward, in some personal situations, we had a family emergency where my dad was very ill, and I decided that I was going to fly back to South Dakota, and within 2 hours or less, I packed my bags and I was at the airport. But what I decided in that time is I will always have a packed cosmetic bag and first aid kit, always. So that if I need to go and short notice, it is always ready with the things that I need, and it is something I rotate stock on a regular basis. After the fires of 2018, that was motivation to get really serious about what kinds of things to put in an emergency and disaster kit. And at that time, actually, it was 2 years ago, my husband and I decided to create emergency kits for our 3 adult daughters. And lo and behold, one of them already had one. So I was pretty impressed that they had taken the initiative on that. And then finally, we had some friends. The emergency and disaster preparedness came close to home. Last month, we had friends who stayed with us for 13 days because they had to evacuate from their home in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So this is a little bit about my personal experience and why I think it's important to make sure that we are always prepared, and the best way to do it is to just start. As Ann mentioned, my position at Los Altos Lutheran Church is a position that focuses primarily on pastoral care and outreach. And one of the things that Ann has worked with the faith-based organizations in Los Altos, in that conversation, we are working together as community partners. Now, it's a lot more difficult right now when we are meeting for worship over Zoom. But the faith-based organizations still do have about quarterly meetings, and we share best practices. And so from those conversations, our congregation actually kicked off a month-long focus a year ago, last September, on emergency and disaster preparedness. And we had a series of talks, and Ann came out, and we talked about what kinds of things they could put in a to-go kit if they needed to. And one of the reasons it matters that faith-based organizations are partners with the community is that the community organizations can focus on the actual practical needs. The Red Cross comes in and they know what their job is. And the emergency and disaster coordinator knows who to contact, and the police know what their job is. Well, the job of the faith-based organizations is to focus on the relationships, because faith-based organizations are in the relationship business. That is what we do. We gather in community. We are an intergenerational community, and so we offer intergenerational resources when we partner with the community. And one of the things that we focused on in our congregation is the fact that when we are personally prepared at home with our to-go kits, we have more resources with which to care for our neighbor in need. And that's part of the thing that we can, as churches and faith-based organizations, that we can offer the community is a partnership. So, when I first started thinking about emergency and disaster preparedness, the focus was primarily on earthquakes. Well, but then of course there's fires, and thinking about evacuation plans. And now we have PSPS, the Public Safety Power Shutoff, and the rolling power outages, and how do we be prepared for those situations? And we suddenly find ourselves in the midst of a global pandemic, which is a different kind of an emergency or disaster. And then on a personal note, as I mentioned, sometimes emergency travel comes up. And so it is helpful to have both to-go kits and pieces of things that would be helpful for stay kits. So if there is the PSPS, you're not necessarily going to go anywhere, but you need to be prepared to know how to deal with the power outage. And so we'll get into some of those details as we go along. So you'll notice behind me, I've set up kind of a display of various things that might be useful for either to go or stay kits, and I'm going to be talking about both of them kind of interchangeably. So one of the things that I learned this spring from a good friend, his name is Nick Arnett, and he's been doing workshops on psychological first aid. And that's been especially helpful in the situation in which we find ourselves. And some of this comes from the information through Cadre. So there are 6 phases of a disaster. The first phase is the pre-disaster phase. You may anticipate something could happen. In the case of the fires, the fires are out there, but do we have to evacuate? We don't know. That's that kind of pre-disaster phase. It's a little bit fearful. You might be in shock, disbelief. then the impact happens. And with COVID, it's like all of a sudden we had a shutdown and we didn't know how to deal with it. And we responded in all kinds of ways, depending on our both inner resources and what was expected of us in our personal and professional life. And then the next phase is the heroic phase. And you'll recall with back in April, we were cheering on the first responders and we were clapping for all the people who were working in the hospitals, and there were military flyovers, and that was all great and wonderful. And I don't mean to diminish that in any way whatsoever. But you'll notice it hasn't lasted in the way it was back in April and May. And then there's the honeymoon phase. We're gonna get through this, yep. And then about a certain point, and some of what I've been reading lately is the disillusionment phase, where reality and limitations sink in. And that's when people get frustrated and we argue about whether or not we should wear masks and what to do. And we just want to go back to the pre-pandemic phase, and I'm using that as this example, but the same could be true whether the disaster is fire or earthquake. And the disillusionment phase is both the longest and the most difficult. And one of the things that I found the most helpful in going through this workshop is realizing that we may be in a disillusionment phase, and just sometimes it helps to know that's where you're at. And then finally, the reconstruction. Recognizing we are never, ever going back to January, but there's gonna be a new normal and we're gonna be okay and we're gonna get through it and we'll find a way to do it. And that's where being community partners and being prepared to the best of our own ability allows us to be able to care for our neighbor in need. The scripture talks about loving your neighbor as yourself. Well, when we take care of ourselves, that's part of how we love ourselves so that we can then love our neighbor. So as we are stuck in this disillusionment phase of COVID, and hopefully we don't have to deal with any earthquakes, we will get through this. There will be a new normal, and we will have learned some lessons through this. But in the meantime, we need to just start on what we can do now. So, as I mentioned, this conversation is about home supplies for to-go kits and stay kits. And I think one of the most important things, as I mentioned, is to get started. And sometimes it feels a bit overwhelming. So the key here is you want your things easy to access. You want them compact. You want to be able to grab them quickly because they're organized. So if you need to do a quick evacuation, you can. And in our case, they're multi-purpose. In some cases, some of the bags are useful for you know, travel. We do a cross-country trip to the Midwest nearly every summer. And so some of these things are just automatically packed. The paper plates and the silverware and the Swiss Army knife, and some of those things are already always packed. And then, but they're also, so they're multi-purpose. And of course, you can customize them for whatever your personal needs are. So what I'm going to be talking about is what we have done for our family and how we put things together. And I also am going to be showing a number of brand names. And I just want you to know, I'm not promoting any particular brand. I'm just showing you what I have chosen to use, what we have in our home. So most important, whether you're at home or you need to evacuate or whether you're traveling, is to make sure you have plenty of water. And you want a gallon of water per person for at least 3 days, up to 2 weeks. So you can see the store of water down there, or the 55-gallon tank there. I don't happen to have that. Anne was the one who suggested having something like that. Another option is, if for some reason there's something where the water's quality may be questionable, it's helpful to have things like Aquatabs, which can purify the water, or a water filtration kit. Now, my husband uses these things when he goes backpacking or camping. So we happen to have it, but it's also useful for other kinds of things should the water supply become questionable. So water, super important. The other thing that's super important is the first aid kit. And believe it or not, all those items that you see there, nearly all of them will fit in the bag that I have shown here on the table there. There's Clorox wipes and sunscreen, and there's, you wanna make sure that you have prescription medications if you need them, Band-Aids, antibacterial cream, anti-inflammatories like Advil, salt. The reason I include salt in a first aid kit is because salt has benefits for if you have a mouth injury, you can rinse with salt. Athletic tape, I find Pepto-Bismol helpful for tummy issues. And so if you're traveling or there's a situation where you needed to evacuate and we need to be out for a while and you don't know what your food supply is going to be, it's beneficial to have a few of those things. So you can see what I've included here in the list of suggestions. And again, these are suggestions. This would be personalized. I just realized one of the things that I don't have on this list is an extra pair of eyeglasses. Of course, I can't go anywhere without glasses, and that is something that I wanted to make sure I mentioned too. You could put your old pair from, you know, prior prescription in your kit, and then it's just ready to go. And then the hygiene kit, that's the thing that I mentioned that is always packed. My cosmetic bag or hygiene kit is always packed for any travel, and of course it would be ready to go. It is ready to go. If we were needing to evacuate quickly, I would just grab that bag and it'd be ready to go. It has soap and hand sanitizer and toothbrushes, toothpaste, shampoo, deodorant, chapstick, there's toilet paper. And for the women, you want to make sure you have whatever products you need. And then also a hand towel and washcloth. You maybe don't need a bath towel, but at least something that if you want to wash your face, you could do that. Okay, moving on. So this was kind of a new idea for us this spring, a portable toilet. And some of you might be going, what? So that was exactly my feeling too. And actually back in the spring with the pandemic, we wanted to go visit our daughter who lived down in Yuma, Arizona at the time. And we knew it was a 10-hour drive and it would not be possible to go that distance without stopping somewhere. And with COVID, we were not comfortable going into a public restroom. So we kind of hit on the idea of, well, is there something? And lo and behold, we started Googling and discovered something called the Luggable Loo. Now, there are lots of portable toilet options. This is probably one of the least expensive options. And it's simply a 5-gallon bucket. In this case, it's a Home Depot bucket with a lid that is an actual seat that seals, it snaps shut, and it uses black garbage bags. You can put your toilet paper in there. And one of the things that we discovered on the website is that this is a perfect thing for your emergency and disaster preparedness kit. I did not know that, but now it is part of our kit, and it's perfect for the pandemic, and it's perfect if the water supply gets shut off and you need an option. So there are also other supplies as well. This is a Go Anywhere toilet kit. So anyway, there's lots of options out there. If you start to just look on the internet, you'll see some options, but this is our option. So certainly another thing that you need is food. Now, what I have combined here is a combination of to-go kits or stay kits. But if you needed to evacuate, the things that you see in that picture are things that are in that black and red Trader Joe's bag. They happen to be ready to go, and it's enough food for several days that would be able to be hydrated with just a little bit of water. The instant oatmeal, the dehydrated meals, the canned soup is just you know, open, and you don't have to even heat the soup if you don't want to, but you can. So I find that it's helpful to have a combination of things like the dehydrated food. So again, I'm not promoting a brand, but I'm telling you a brand that we are aware of that we have actually liked. This is the Mountain House Foods. They sell this at REI. And the nice thing about this for an emergency kit is the expiration date is February of 2047. 2047. So this is shelf stable for a long time. And I can tell you, we have used these for backpacking, and the Mountain House Foods taste good. And it's just add water, boiling water, for example. So one of the other things that we have in our kit is, because my husband does backpacking and he uses a lot of lightweight things, this is a tiny little burner, fits in this little container, and this is the burner, and it attaches to some fuel, which I don't have in the house here. But it's just a little canister about this big, and it attaches to the fuel, and you set, I have this ancient coffee pot. You just set it on top of it. Heats about 2 cups of water, which would be enough for 2 packages of oatmeal or the Mountain House food or so on. So other things that we found helpful are, you know, oatmeal packets, canned chili or canned soup, canned beans. The nice thing about like garbanzo beans is if you mash them, they can be turned into hummus, they can be put into soups or so on. Canned chicken or tuna, if you eat those things, and of course dried fruit, it's always helpful. I like dates, since you see the picture of the Natural Delights. And then tea and coffee. And I included the tea and coffee because it's really important if you are used to having that caffeine. The last thing you need if you have to evacuate is a caffeine headache. So make sure you have that coffee or tea in your kit. And then I also like to make sure we have some chocolate. And in my emergency kit, chocolate is part of the emergency food supply. Cooking supplies. So the bag you see there, which is actually directly behind me, it has several pockets, and in those and it's an insulated bag. So if I needed to, actually let me go back, you'll notice that inside the red and black Trader Joe's bag is an additional bag. That is there, so if we wanted to grab some additional food items from the refrigerator, we'd just put them in there quickly and we'd go, or we could put the non-perishables in that and have the insulated bag ready for the yogurt or the cheese or whatever from the refrigerator. So cooking supplies. So in addition to the little stove, it's helpful to have, you know, a plate, a bowl, a cup, a fork, a spoon for each family member. I have a couple of sharp knives. I have a small cutting board that fits in that bag, Swiss Army knife, utility knife. We also have a small toolkit, believe it or not, a couple of screwdrivers, a pliers, and a wrench. And then also to have just a little bit of aluminum foil can be used for cooking, but it can also be used for other things as well. Garbage bags, plastic sandwich bags, you never know. You might need those bags for trash, you might need them for other kinds of things, or even some, you know, health and safety things. And some paper towels, which again are multi-purpose. So some other emergency supplies that we keep in our kit, and again, this it has been accumulated over years, and part of this is for the emergencies that might come up if you have to evacuate, or if, depending on what the situation is. And a lot of these are part of the backpacking kit. So there's matches, candle, a mirror. So if you happen to be out, that mirror will catch a signal, or you can use it for reflective purposes, a whistle, so that you can call for help. flashlight, and of course with your flashlight you want to make sure you can operate it with the that you have sufficient batteries, or in this case I have a little wind-up flashlight, and you wind it and then it will work for, after you wind it more than I just did, it will shine for a while. I don't remember how long. Other emergency supplies, things like an emergency blanket. It doesn't take up much space, it just tucks right in, but if you need it because of a health emergency, you've got it. Again, I mentioned the toolkit. Masks, of course, now we know we can't go anywhere without one. I have to say, after the 2018 fires, my husband and I decided we were not going to be without N95 masks. So 2 years ago, we ordered the N95s. And we had sufficient that we could share with some doctor friends of ours. And I have to say, I have been grateful that I've been able to use this while we've had to deal with the terrible smoke of the past month. So it's always a good idea to make sure you have extra masks in your kit, but of course now with COVID, we don't go anywhere without a mask. Paracord. This is kind of an interesting thing. It's a utility cord, but it also, and you know, so you could create a clothesline with it, you could do any number of things with it, but you can also burn it. So if you need to start a fire, you can use this to do that. And battery powered radio, excuse me one second. Battery powered radio, it's a battery or solar. This is a solar powered radio, I should say. So it's that emergency radio, because we can't always count on relying on our phones. If the power, if the towers get knocked out, you want to make sure you have an extra copy of any important documents and make sure that they're password protected. So you can put your documents on a password protected flash drive. Doesn't take up much space. And I just want to mention some really good friends of ours were so good. They had their emergency kit right next to the door and all their important documents there. Somebody broke in the house and stole them. So the advantage of putting them on a password protected flash drive means that nobody can break into it and steal it. You want to make sure you have some extra cash and some small bills, because if the power is out, you might need some money, but the cash registers may not be working. And then you want to have an extra set of keys ready to go as well. Homes, some other supplies, obviously, where would we be without our phones? And so you want to make sure you have your charging cables, you grab your laptop because probably it has all of your important stuff on it, your documents, your work, and then of course the battery power bank. This one happens to live in our car. And then a documents folder, and I just mentioned the password protected flash drive. Maybe I'm going too quickly, but I want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions. Some other things you want to make sure, first of all, because we do live in earthquake country, have a pair of shoes under the bed. And you may want to put them in a bag so that if there happens to be broken glass, that they're protected. One person I heard recently suggested putting them in a bag and tying them to the bedpost, because if there's a lot of shaking, then maybe they'll slide too far. So make sure that your shoes are where you can find them so you can evacuate quickly. You want to make sure you have some extra clothes ready to go, and of course a jacket. Always make sure your jacket is there, because of course we live in Northern California and the days may be warm, but the nights are often cool. Pet supplies, don't forget your pets. And you'll notice our kitty came over to check out what I was doing when I was assembling these things. So in our case, we have a kennel and some food, the dish is there. Make sure you have sufficient water for your pets as well as for yourself. And in our case, because it's a cat, we'll need to make sure we have extra litter, the litter box, and some bags for that, and a leash. Make sure all of those items are handy, and so if you need to evacuate quickly, you can. Treats are often a good idea too, because they will entice your pet if they're scared, and at least you can get that treat and throw the treat in the kennel and see if they'll go in after it. So if you have to leave quickly, here's a few things you could either have in your car or to make sure that you have ready to go. In our case, we have extra masks in our car. I have hand sanitizer in the car, as well as one sitting by the door ready to go out the door. We have jumper cables and a tow rope. My husband is big into tools, so we have all the tools that we need ready to go, either in the car or quickly to be able to grab in the garage. Flashlight, maps. If we are in an earthquake and power lines are down or trees are down or whatever, there's accidents or whatever, it's helpful to know what your alternative routes are. And in a workshop I attended a few weeks ago, there was a debate of, you know, you leave water in your car, but then the plasticizers will get into the water and you need to replace it. And one of the things I was thinking about is we just take a water bottle all the time, anytime we go. And so then we're not throwing more plastic into the landfill. We just have our regular water bottle and we just make a practice of filling it and take it with us for every trip we take. Of course, sunscreen, it helps to have an extra charging cable for your phone in the car. Some nitrile gloves, I prefer the nitrile gloves. And we have bath towels in the car. And we've had bath towels in the car for many, many years, going back to when our children were young and we would happen to be at the beach and there were always, you know, you never know what you need a towel for. And we have used them for everything from wrapping something breakable or protecting a watermelon from rolling around or drying the sand off at the beach. In addition, you can use them as a blanket and to help with an injury. So multi-purpose items for the car. So because we are going through a time that none of us have ever lived through with the pandemic, now some of us have already figured this out, but Dr. Fauci has been talking about it's going to be a long, tough fall and winter. So we need to be thinking about how to be prepared, especially as we get into November through February. And don't be discouraged. Hang on to hope. We can do this. We've already done it for 6 months, 7 months. We can do this. But we can do it more easily if we're prepared. And then once we're prepared, it takes the anxiety down. So if we have a 2 to 4 week supply of food, medical supplies, paper goods already set aside, we're good to go. And actually, as we went into this pandemic, I kind of had this sixth sense that we needed to make sure that we were set. And we did not, my husband and I stocked up on a number of things the last week of February. I managed to get toilet paper before it was gone from the shelves. And we managed to make sure that we had plenty of shelf-stable foods, some frozen foods like some meat. I like to cook up chicken and then it's just ready to go and I can add it to pasta or whatever. And so we prepared a number of those things. And I did not go to the grocery store for a month after the shutdown started. And it is possible. And in fact, it's surprising to me, but I know I know eggs will last in the refrigerator for, a good month. And milk right now is dated out through beginning of November. So you can stock up on some of those things, check the dates, and make sure you use it within the date, and you'll be okay. And then as we're dealing with the pandemic, obviously, you know, there's so many things that make us feel anxious right now. You want to make sure you have those comfort foods. And so don't ever feel like you need to be deprived. You might as well have your ice cream or your chocolate or your coffee, your favorite coffee or your favorite tea or whatever those things are. Just because you feel like you can't go out to a restaurant or you're not wanting to go out and do things, you don't have to be deprived. You can be creative and how you can make this work for yourself. I know that a lot of people over the last few months have learned how to do sourdough bread because they couldn't find yeast. I am now one of the sourdough bread makers, and so now I have to make sure I have enough flour. So thinking about those things that you want to make sure you have at least a 2 to 4 week supply so you can get through a rough patch if you need to. And then make sure that you have some flu-friendly foods in the event that you should get sick with the flu, a cold, whatever, as long as you've got some rice or some chicken soup or some ginger ale, whatever those things are that you find helpful if you're not feeling well. Some additional preparations for the pandemic. So in addition to the food, make sure your medical supplies are up to date. I mean, it's not only important to have them in your to-go kit or your emergency supplies, but make sure you have what you need so that if you need to hunker down for a month or two, you don't have to go hunting for, I don't know, cold medicine when you're already feeling sick. Prescriptions, make sure, I mean, I know that prescriptions, you have to fill those and, follow the prescription guidelines. And you can only, do so much at a time, but just keep an eye on those things as well. Over-the-counter medications, whatever health and hygiene items that you are accustomed to using, make sure you've got a good month or 2 months supply of it. There's no reason you can't, unless for financial reasons you can't afford it. And that's a different game, and I understand. Paper goods, cleaning supplies, pet food and pet supplies. And you'll notice in bold print and all caps, get a flu shot. Dr. Fauci's been talking about make sure you get your flu shot. So also very important and part of our preparations for a pandemic. And at this point, like I said, we've already made it this far. Hang in there. We'll get through this. We can do it. So some other things you might think about for emergency and disaster preparedness. Get an air purifier. This is something we've talked about for a while, and especially 2 years ago when the smoke was bad, but we didn't get one, and we've now endured another month and now more smoke. And so we are getting an air purifier this week. It does make a difference. Our daughter has one, and it makes a tremendous amount of difference. So that might be something, if you can afford it, to think about. Maybe a generator to have backup for your refrigerator and freezer if in the event of a PSPS. Of course, remember that you don't need to open your refrigerator and freezer as often if the power is out, and keep it shut. You may want to think about what's in your fridge and freezer that you could use more quickly if the power is out, and what to do with it. And maybe team up with your neighbors if you want to, share supplies or something. And then another thing we do is I just keep a couple of jugs of water, juice bottles really, of drinking water. It's filtered and it's in the freezer, and we just keep it in there all the time. I can use it as an ice block if we travel somewhere. It's always ready to go, and it is filtered drinking water so that you can drink it if you need to. A few other thoughts. Again, don't be overwhelmed. Just get started somewhere. So just start. And if this feels like this list is too long, too great, too overwhelming, just get a little at a time. And in my case, you know, some of the medicines that we have are the things that we just have. And they're easy to grab. I keep a little bit in my first aid kit, a little bit in the kitchen cabinet, but we just have them, and then rotate stock. You always want to rotate your stock. So when you get new, take it from your to-go kit and put the new in the kit. It's important to keep things fresh. And then also, as you think about organizing your supplies, think in terms of organizing them in categories. Here's the water category. You either have your extra water supply, your drinking water, your water filtration if you think you might need that. And then there's the food supply. What do you want to have that would be non-perishable? And what could you have in the refrigerator or freezer that you could pull from so you don't have to go shopping if you don't want to go out? Making sure you have the cooking supplies if you have to evacuate quickly. What are your options? And making sure, so in our case, yes, we have this handy little stove, but the fuel is outside. It can't be stored inside. So I made a little note that we have to go get the fuel. And again, another category is the medication, as we talked about, the cleaning supplies, the paper goods, and any other emergency supplies you might need. So I've run through this fairly quickly, but let me just say once again that when you are prepared personally, you can act instead of react in a stressful time. You are preparing and pulling these things together now so that you have peace of mind in the event of a disaster or a crisis. And when you are able to act instead of react, you can choose how you are able to help others. You can trust that you have already pulled together the things that you need because you have thought it through when you are able to think clearly. And that's really important. And that's part of that psychological first aid as well. It's taking care of you. And then the other thing I'll just say, I didn't write it here, is in the event of an emergency or disaster, make sure you remember to breathe. And Anne, I'm sure, will be smiling now because, as I've mentioned, she and I have done yoga together. And one of the important things is remember to breathe in and breathe out. And if you breathe in and out slowly 3 times, you'll find that the stress level will go down and your clarity will increase, and you'll feel like you've got this. You can do what you need to in the event of some situation that feels overwhelming. So with that, I want to just say I'm open for some questions. I've covered a lot of material quickly, and I am happy to make sure that you have the information available. But before I take questions, I just want to say thank you to Anne for this invitation. And I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us in this conversation. You took time out of your busy life to do this, and I just want to thank you for doing so. And with that, I'll turn it over to Anne.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lavinia. You covered excellent information. Again, we'll post the presentation, we'll post the recording on losaltosca.gov/prepares. Folks, you can put your questions or other comments in either the chat window or the Q&A window. Let me just read a few of the ones that came in while you were talking. Earlier, you were talking about glasses, and Dawn points out that, you know, you can get some small foldable glasses that pack small if you only need the magnifiers, right? If you need readers and they're right, and so forth. And then he suggests at the drugstore, there's some you know, glasses like that, or thin optics that attach to the back of your cell phone. So that's a tip. Another tip that Dawn had was around air filters. So a way to make a makeshift air filter is you buy a filter or two, I presume like for a furnace filter, Dawn, and fit them to a box fan. You want a rating 13 or higher. And he referenced WikiHow. It's in the Q&A. I can put it in the chat box as well.
Great idea.
I know somebody's mentioned to me the jet boiler, which is a nice little device. Is that the brand that you have too? Yeah.
Yes.
Jetboil. Okay.
Jetboil. So we have the Jetboil and the antique coffee pot.
Wonderful. And I want to emphasize, register for the County Emergency Alert Notification System, the alertscc.org. You can go there and check it. Kevin was suggesting hand crank radios are also available for the emergency ones. You know, sometimes they have a hand crank, or they have a solar, or they have a battery, you know, different options depending what you need. Let's see, animal crate should be a safe place for the animal, not used for punishment. So hopefully people are not using an animal crate normally for punishment, but it's cozy place so that when you put the animal in it to take it in evacuation, it's not upset about that. It's seeing it as a cozy place. Other questions people have, or other comments and tips? We've got a lot of knowledge just looking at some of the names. I see some names from Los Altos, from neighboring cities. We're so glad everybody called in. We invited CERT teams from all over the county to join us tonight. And
yes, I'm noticing the comments about Nick's webinar and his, I have to say, on a personal note, I have known Nick since he moved to California over 30 years ago. I have known him through church and his wife. I was at their wedding. And I'm just so proud of the work that Nick is doing with his Stress into Strength work. He is a true professional. He's currently working up on a fire line, and if you get a chance to attend his psychological first aid class once he gets done with the fires, he's amazing. So, personal friend, but really good.
Do Google Nick Barnett. He's got a couple of books that he's written. He periodically does webinars and he lists them on his site. On my losaltosca.gov/prepare site, he did a webinar for us, which we recorded, and I have a link to his upcoming webinars, you know, the place where he posts that, so you can check that out. When we did the...
You find him on Facebook too.
Yeah, and when we did his webinars, hosted his webinar, people were telling me that was so meaningful to me. It was just what I needed to hear, because we did it in, maybe it was April, I kind of forget, in the middle of the pandemic, shut down.
He was at the forefront of that.
It was all really upsetting, and it really helped people deal with it and take a sense of control and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, Mark suggests if you can't use a car when you have to move, you know, put your gear in a backpack or a little red wagon. And other people have suggested to me, you buy a brand new is key, trash bin that's on wheels, and you can load it in there and drag it. In my experience, the one that I bought, I don't think I can drag it very far because the wheels aren't super sturdy, but it would allow you to move it from one zone to an area that's a little bit safer. Let's see, other questions or comments people have. And again, I'll pop in the website. We did a webinar earlier this year. We called it, what did I call it? Like Emergency Preparedness Checkup or something like that. And we have presentation material posted there that you may also find good. And this losaltosca.gov prepare site is where we'll post Lavinia's webinar and her materials as well. Well, enough comments come in. Anything else you want to convey, Lavinia?
I covered things rather quickly, and I know that. If somebody wants to reach out to me, they can do so. Otherwise, I know I covered things quickly. It's never quite sure how much time to.
Structured, and you went at a good pace. So you're going to, everybody who's registered for this webinar, you're going to get a follow-up email tomorrow. It will automatically have my email in there, and you're welcome to email me. I can put you in touch with Lavinia. And hopefully if you have questions or additional thoughts after the webinar, we're glad to follow up with you. And we're glad to take your additional tips and learnings and add them for the next one. Because everybody's figuring this out together. The key, as Lavinia says, is just get started. You look at the list, it can be too much. Just pick one thing. Hopefully tonight, You're going to stick shoes under your bed. Wow, you've started. And you're just taking steps every day. Next time you go to the store, you buy more water, or whatever it is that you're going to tackle first. You know, people say 3 days of water. I would like you to see 5. I would be happy if you have 7 days of water stored and have 7 days of food. And in these times, as Lavinia pointed out, it's not just an earthquake or a wildfire or even the power safety shut off. It can be, I am not willing to go out right now, or I don't feel well enough to go out right now. So think of those things. Lavinia mentioned the flu shot. We've been doing COVID Q&A with Dr. Yu, who's a local family practice physician that gives us a briefing every 2 weeks, and then he answers questions. And he's been emphasizing the need for flu shots. Not only does it remove your fears, oh my God, I got COVID, the symptoms kind of overlap. You'll remove that risk because you'll say, okay, I've gotten my flu shot. So that if you're not going to falsely have symptoms and be frightened. You're also going to reduce the load on the healthcare system. You're not going to be going in for flu.
Right.
Okay, we stalled long enough for a question. Allison wants to know, where do you keep 4 weeks of food?
Okay, well, I have to admit, I have a good sized pantry. I've personally always had a well-stocked pantry. So we have 2 refrigerators and a deep freeze, which gives us some options that I know other people don't have the luxury of either space or financial space for that. We also have started, when we come home from the grocery store, if it's non-perishable, we just put it in a room that is not being used for anything in particular. We have a guest bedroom, and so that's our decontamination area.
And so have that luxury, right?
Exactly, and I recognize a lot of people don't have that luxury. So we have a spot where I keep some extra granola, for example, or some extra things.
And some people have a shed, you know, like they may have a shed in the backyard or in the side yard.
Right.
The other thing I've heard about, some people tell me, oh yeah, for part of our belief system is to keep a long supply of food. We need to have up to a year. And you say, well, where do you store it? And they say, well, I store it. We have stairs in our house and there's a little cubby under the stairs.
Right.
We stack it underneath the beds. A little coffee table out of canned goods and put a box over it and a cover. And the answer, where do you keep it, is where you can get it when you need it and it's not going to be in your way, and you can build up to it slowly. You know, if you're doing a little bit every week, it's a little less overwhelming. There's a great website called Do One Thing with the numeral 1, and it gives you a theme for your month. And it's like, never mind everything. Do this one thing, and you have a task for the month that you work on. So there's a lot of options. Well, with that, let's see. Make sure I check my questions. Okay. Lavinia, hopefully it's you that's frozen and not me, because I continue to talk. Those who have health or dietary restrictions need to find food they can eat and have a long shelf life and don't require refrigeration. So just remember to keep rotating your food. I just did rotation in celebration of National Preparedness, Emergency Preparedness Month. And I went through and made a Google sheet for myself with what I have and what the expiration dates are. And then I made notes in my calendar. Remember to rotate this. There we go.
Dropped off for a moment. My internet suddenly was unstable and it dropped for a moment. So, but okay. I'm back.
We gotcha.
Yeah, so in terms of storage of food, it's whatever makes sense for your family and your needs and however you can manage your supply. Main thing is to rotate things so you're not wasting food.
Yeah. And I was just sharing, I made a note in my calendar because I just rotated all my water and my food supplies. And I did a Google sheet to note when they're due to rotate again. And then I can put in little reminders. You might pick a family birthday. You might pick daylight savings, you know, whatever it takes to help prompt you. Oh, this is a great chance to check. Or
September, it's Emergency and Disaster Preparedness Month.
So Larry has a question. Do you keep all your bags in the same spot, right? You showed us these various bags, or do you put them in different places in the house?
Actually, we have one spot in our family room, and so it's basically a Rubbermaid storage tote because it's waterproof, and most of the emergency disaster supplies fit in that. There's the red Trader Joe's bag for the food. There's a kind of a picnic bag for paper plates and silverware and cups. And then there's another bag over there, plus the water and the kennel. And it all sits in one spot. We have a grand piano, and it all sits underneath the grand piano in the family room. So it's easy to access. It's mostly out of the way if you have room in a closet or something like that, but it's all in one spot.
And pardon my not so cheerful thought, if the ceiling collapses, the grand piano will make a little cave that you can crawl in and get your stuff back out.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Some people have told me, like talking to a firefighter, they were saying when you keep your kits, some people store them in the garage. And just be aware in the garage, right, you have that big door the cars go in and out. Well, that's not as structural. The side of the garage, there's a door usually where people go in and out. Well, that has more wall, that has more structure. So you may want to put your stuff next to that door, because if the garage collapses, you're more likely that that wall will be open and you'll be able to find your gear rather than where the garage door might fall in.
Right.
So let's see, some people they're sharing, yeah, we have our 4-week stash and a few big boxes in our entry and we keep stumbling over it, it's in our way. I like the idea of putting it under the stairs, and she also liked the idea of putting it in the shed in the garage or out in the yard. The key is, you know, to have it in a place where you can get it and it's not in your way. In my case, so your husband doesn't criticize it. He says, oh, crikey, what'd you do?
Well, and you know, my husband and our daughter do a lot of backpacking. And so they have learned how to condense things. And so having a stove that fits in a little box like this is a lot different than the big old Coleman stoves like we used to have. And I don't know what this cost, but because they've used it for backpacking, but it's just a little tiny burner stove and it would heat water.
There you go. Another thing might be space bags, like you were talking about having a change of clothes, and I've been struggling with how the heck do I fit all this in my backpack? And I just realized space bags, a kind of large bag, it looks like a giant Ziploc, and you put it in, and then you either roll the air out or you vacuum the air out, and it squishes down into a surprisingly heavy little package, but it's something you can stash in a smaller space.
Right. Well, and you know, you can also, I mean, depending on how your home is laid out, there are some things you can maybe have by the door. Our shoes are always by the door. Our masks are always by the door. The hand sanitizer is always by the door. So there are some of those things that we are just in the habit of, they're by the door. It may not be very beautiful. We try and keep them organized. And we actually have a little tote that if we did need to go, it has a few other things in it. It's by the door. And there's a jacket that is easy to grab on the way out. So.
And I know a neighbor of mine, they have their family go bags, and everybody has a backpack, and they're hanging on hooks in the interior wall in the garage, easy to grab and go. Some people have told me, oh, I keep it in the hallway closet where it's easy to get. So you have to have that balance between easy to get, I'm going to be able to reach it, I'm going to remember where it is, and not in my way.
And not in my way, not looking cluttered. Yeah, it's that real struggle. And, you know, everybody's home is different. The way that we manage our space and the way that we manage our stuff. But the best way you can think of small, you know, so if you have little tiny bottles that you could put some shampoo in instead of the big bottle, for example.
Well, with that, it's 8:30. I'm not seeing other questions popped in. Oh, yeah. Oh, and Don suggests stuff sacks. You know, you can use those for soft items like clothes. You know, you might think dry bags that you would take kayaking if you need to stuff clothes in a way that protects it from weather. So a sack can hold a lot of things. My dad was in the Navy and he kept his sea bags, and it was always amazing. We would pack in the sea bags to take a car trip, and it held so much more than a suitcase.
It's so true.
Some people, oh, Allison says, we have flashlights plugged into a few outlets which will light up when the power goes out, and then they act as flashlights for about 4 hours. Of course, that can be a big comfort in the middle of the night. There's an outage, there's an event, and you'll be able to see. So
right.
Tip as well. Okay, with that, I think I will wrap it up. Again, thanks everybody for joining. You've stayed the whole hour. I hope that you learned something or got some tips that you can use. You certainly shared your tips back with us, and we appreciate it. And again, posting this out. Thanks so much for joining tonight, everybody, and good night.
Thank you. Take care.